In front of all the guests, the groom abandoned the bride at the altar, humiliating her for her poverty and skin color. He thought he had destroyed her forever. But at that moment, a man entered the church who changed the course of events forever. Her real father, a billionaire she didn't even know existed. What happened next shocked everyone. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching us from. The morning sun filtered softly through the sheer curtains of the small bedroom, bathing the modest space in a gentle glow. Layla Simons stirred beneath her worn quilt, her heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Today, she was marrying Adam Winters, the man she loved with all her heart, the man who, she believed, had seen beyond the circumstances of her life and into the person she truly was. She sat up slowly, brushing the sleep from her eyes, and for a moment simply absorbed the significance of the day. The room around her was humble but filled with warmth. The faded but clean wallpaper, the dresser her mother had restored by hand, the bouquet of wildflowers sitting in a chipped vase. And hanging carefully from the closet door was her wedding dress, a simple, elegant creation she and her mother had chosen together after weeks of searching. It wasn't designer or dripping with luxury, but it was beautiful in its own right, just like Layla herself. She swung her feet onto the floor and padded across the room to stand before the dress, trailing her fingers reverently along the delicate lace. Her mother, Elaine Simons, knocked softly and peeked inside. "Morning, baby," Elaine said, her voice already thick with emotion. She stepped into the room, carrying a tray with toast and tea, setting it down carefully on the nightstand. "Big day." Layla smiled, a nervous tremor running through her. "Biggest day." Elaine hesitated, then crossed the room to wrap her daughter in a tight embrace. "You look radiant already, and you're not even in the dress yet." Layla leaned into the hug, feeling the familiar steadiness of her mother's love. Yet underneath it, she sensed something else too, a worry, a tension that Elaine couldn't quite mask. They both pretended not to notice it. As Layla dressed and prepared, there was a fragile excitement in the air, but it was tinged with something heavier. The kind of weight that pressed against her chest in quiet moments when she allowed herself to remember the disapproving stares of Adam's family, the stiff politeness of his mother, the veiled comments about ambition and fitting into the right circles. It didn't matter, she told herself. Love conquered everything. The car ride to the church was a blur of sunlight and nerves. Elaine sat beside her in the small rented sedan, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her own simple blue dress. Layla stared out the window, watching the city pass by in a haze of emotion. "You sure you're ready for this?" Elaine asked quietly at one point, her hand finding Layla's. Layla squeezed back. "I love him, Mama. That's all that matters." Elaine didn't argue, but her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes grew distant. When they arrived at the church, Layla's breath caught in her throat. St. Augustine's Cathedral was grander than any place she had ever imagined marrying in. High stone arches stretched toward the heavens, stained glass windows throwing brilliant colors across the gleaming marble floor. Expensive flower arrangements adorned every pew, and a string quartet tuned their instruments softly near the altar. Guests milled about outside in polished suits and designer dresses. Almost all of them were strangers to Layla. Pale faces turned toward her, assessing, measuring. She caught snippets of conversations, murmurs about her background, subtle comments about how well she had cleaned up. Elaine helped Layla from the car, and for a moment they stood together, two figures dwarfed by the grandeur around them. "You are beautiful," Elaine said fiercely, adjusting Layla's veil with shaken hands. Inside, as she waited in the bridal room, Layla tried to calm herself. She sat on a small velvet bench, holding her bouquet of white roses, inhaling their delicate scent to steady her nerves. Through the thin door, she could hear footsteps, low voices, the shifting energy of the congregation finding their places. Time seemed to stretch and contract. Zoe, her best friend and only bridesmaid, peeked in to check on her, offering an encouraging smile. "They're ready when you are," Zoe said. Her voice, usually so confident, was uncharacteristically soft. Layla rose to her feet, smoothing the front of her dress, and nodded. "Let's do this." The music swelled as she stepped into the nave. Every head turned. The sunlight pouring through the stained glass bathed her in a cascade of colors as she made her way down the aisle. She spotted Adam at the altar, tall and handsome in his tailored tuxedo, hands clasped loosely in front of him. For a moment, her nerves abated. This was it. They would be together, and nothing else mattered. Yet, as she approached, something in Adam's face struck her. His smile was strained. His eyes flickered past her, toward the pews, where his mother sat ramrod straight, her expression severe. His father leaned over, whispering something in her ear. Adam shifted uncomfortably. Layla's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to keep moving forward. When she reached the altar, Adam took her hand mechanically. His skin was clammy against hers. The pastor smiled warmly at them and began to speak, his words echoing through the vast space. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Adam Winters and Layla Simons in holy matrimony." Layla barely heard the words. All she could hear was the roaring of her own pulse. She squeezed Adam's hand, seeking reassurance. He didn't squeeze back. The ceremony moved forward, but Adam seemed more distant with each passing moment. His jaw tightened. His gaze darted toward his parents. Layla followed his line of sight and caught his mother's disapproving frown. The pastor turned to Adam. "Adam, do you take Layla to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Adam pulled his hand away. A murmur rippled through the church. He began, then cleared his throat. His voice was suddenly loud, too loud, reverberating through the vaulted ceiling. "I can't do this." A gasp swept the congregation like a wave. Layla froze, staring at him in disbelief. Adam stepped back, putting distance between them. His expression shifted, cool, detached, almost smug. "I can't marry you, Layla," he said, each word deliberate. "You're not right for this family. You don't belong here." The words fell like blows, each one more painful than the last. You're too different," he continued, his voice sharp with cruel emphasis. "You come from nothing. This," he gestured grandly to the church, the guest, the ceremony, "this life isn't meant for someone like you." Layla stood rooted to the spot, the bouquet slipping from her fingers and hitting the marble floor with a soft thud. Her vision blurred. Somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed. Short, ugly, quickly stifled. Elaine gasped audibly, her hands covering her mouth in horror. Zoe looked as if she might rush forward, but was held back by the stunned etiquette of the gathering. Adam turned his back on her and walked away, each step echoing loudly in the stunned silence. Layla couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. The humiliation was complete. Everything she had hoped for, dreamed of, fought for, shattered in an instant. The pastor cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly at a loss. Guests began to murmur louder now, some whispering, some openly gossiping. Phones appeared in hands ready to capture the spectacle. Layla's knees wobbled. The colors from the stained glass windows spun dizzily around her. She was drowning in a sea of judgment, of pity, of betrayal, and no one moved to help her. The dream was over. The life she had imagined collapsed around her like a crumbling cathedral. And just when she thought she could bear no more, a deep, thunderous sound filled the air, growing louder and louder until it drowned out the whispers, the judgment, the shame. Above the church, a new presence was descending, a sound that would change everything. Forever. The sound of the helicopter rumbled closer, vibrating the ancient stones of the cathedral and sending loose petals tumbling from the grand flower arrangements. Yet, for a few terrible moments, Layla heard none of it. Her world had collapsed inward, shrunk to the space where she stood alone before an indifferent crowd, her dreams lying broken at her feet. The colorful light from the stained glass windows, once so magical, now painted her in mockery, a surreal spotlight on her shame. She could feel every eye in the room burning into her, some with pity, others with poorly concealed satisfaction. The pity hurt almost as much as the cruelty. Layla swayed slightly, her body numb, her mind blank. She barely noticed when the pastor quietly stepped aside, murmuring something about giving her space. Murmurs spread through the pews like wildfire. Some guests pretended to look away, others stared openly, their expressions a blend of horror and fascination. Whispers filled the vast chamber. "Did you hear what he said? Poor girl, left at the altar. I knew this would happen. She doesn't belong here." The cruel words, though softly spoken, hit Layla like physical blows. Each one lodged itself deep inside her, tearing at her fragile composure. Elaine tried to rush forward, her face pale with maternal anguish, but a well-dressed usher stepped into her path with a look of polite disapproval. The guests were still seated, bound by the rigid formality of the event, unsure of what to do, unwilling to break the decorum even when it had already been shattered. Layla's hands trembled as she slowly bent to retrieve the bouquet that had fallen from her grasp. The white roses were bruised now, petals scattered across the polished floor. She clutched them to her chest as if they could shield her from the jeer and silence. Through the haze of humiliation, she caught sight of Adam at the back of the church, speaking urgently with his father and a few others. He did not look back at her, not once. His dismissal of her was complete and absolute, as though she were not even worth a second glance. The helicopter's roar grew louder, its deep mechanical thrum a strange counterpoint to the cathedral's ancient solemnity. Heads turned upward, confused, annoyed. Some guests rose from their seats and peered through the tall stained glass windows. A few began drifting towards the massive oak doors at the church entrance, drawn by curiosity and disruption. Layla barely noticed. Her world remained small and hollow, filled with the echoes of Adam's words. Too different, from nothing, not right for their family. The words repeated endlessly in her mind, growing heavier with each cycle. She had loved him. She had believed in him. She had trusted that love would be enough to bridge the differences in their upbringings, in their worlds. She had been a fool. The helicopter noise ceased abruptly, replaced by the high-pitched whine of its engine winding down. Heavy footsteps approached the entrance of the cathedral, crisp and purposeful. The giant oak doors, centuries old, creaked open with a groan that seemed almost theatrical in its timing. A blast of sunlight poured into the dim church, momentarily blinding those inside. A man stepped into the light. At first, all Layla could make out was the silhouette. Tall, broad-shouldered, imposing. He wore an impeccably tailored black suit that caught the sunlight in subtle gleams. 2 men in dark suits followed close behind him, scanning the crowd with sharp, assessing eyes. Bodyguards, clearly. The newcomer's very posture radiated authority, the kind of authority that needed no announcement, no explanation. The congregation fell into a stunned silence, all heads swiveling toward the entrance. Murmured questions rippled through the pews. Who is that? Security? Another guest? But no one recognized him. The man walked forward with unhurried confidence, his shoes clicking sharply against the marble. He moved like a king entering his court, every step deliberate, commanding attention without demanding it. He stopped directly in front of Layla. Only then did she truly see his face. Strong features lined by experience, deep-set eyes the same rich, dark brown as her own, and a mouth set in a firm, unsmiling line. His hair, cut close to his scalp, was silver at the temples, adding to his air of gravitas. He looked at her, and something in his eyes softened, a flash of emotion so raw that it pierced through Layla's numbness. "Layla Simons," he said, his voice deep and resonant, carrying effortlessly to every corner of the cathedral. "My daughter." The words struck the congregation like a lightning bolt. Gasps echoed off the stone walls. Chairs scraped against the floor as people shifted, craning their necks to see better. Adam, halfway out the side door, froze in place, turning back with wide, disbelieving eyes. Layla stared at the man, utterly bewildered. Her mind refused to process what she was hearing. "My daughter." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Elaine, tears streaming down her face, finally broke through the frozen crowd. She ran to Layla's side, taking her hand in a trembling grip. "I'm sorry," she whispered hoarsely. "I should have told you. I should have told you everything." Layla turned to her mother, her heart pounding painfully against her ribs. "Mama, who is he?" Elaine looked up at the man, her expression filled with guilt, fear, and something else, hope. "That's Caleb Moore," she said in a shaken voice. "Your father." Another collective gasp filled the cathedral. The name spread among the guests like wildfire, whispered from mouth to mouth. Caleb Moore. Even Layla, sheltered from the world of wealth and power, recognized the name. A titan of industry, a billionaire, a man whose business empire stretched across continents, a man whose influence was felt in politics, technology, finance. His face had graced the covers of magazines, his name had filled headlines, and he was claiming her. Layla swayed again, and this time Caleb stepped forward, steadying her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find you," he said quietly, the steel in his voice tempered now with unmistakable tenderness. "But I'm here now, and I promise no one will ever hurt you again." The guests sat frozen in their pews, trapped between disbelief and fascination. No one dared speak. Adam stumbled forward a few steps, his face pale. This isn't possible," he stammered. She's. Caleb's head turned slowly toward him, and in that moment, Adam shrank back visibly, as if physically struck by the force of the older man's gaze. "You dared to humiliate my daughter," Caleb said, his voice low but filled with a power that resonated like a distant drum. "You dared to treat her as less than nothing." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You and your family will regret that choice." Adam's mouth opened and closed like a drowning man gasping for air. Caleb turned back to Layla, his expression softening once more. "You don't have to stay here," he said. "Come with me. Let's leave this place behind." Layla hesitated for one agonizing moment. still paralyzed by the surreal, dreamlike quality of everything happening around her. Then she looked around the cathedral, the cold faces, the judgment, the contempt, and felt a wave of revulsion rise in her chest. She looked at Caleb, at the strength and sincerity in his eyes. And she made her decision. She dropped the crushed bouquet on the marble floor and took his outstretched hand. The doors swung open again as they exited, father and daughter walking side by side into the bright sunlight. Behind them, the cathedral dissolved into chaos, and high above, the helicopter waited. The future waited. A new beginning was unfolding, born not of shame, but of something stronger. Pride, love, and power that no one in that hateful room could ever take away from her again. The sun blazed overhead as Layla stepped out of the cathedral into a world that felt almost too bright, too loud after the heavy, suffocating darkness inside. The marble steps radiated heat through the thin soles of her satin shoes, and the helicopter loomed just beyond the gates, its rotors slowing but still slicing the air with rhythmic, heavy beats that seemed to reverberate through her very bones. Caleb Moore never once let go of her hand as they crossed the threshold together, the towering oak doors swinging shut behind them with a final, thunderous boom, as if sealing away the humiliation and betrayal she was leaving behind. Layla could hear the commotion beginning to build within the church. Shouted questions, angry exclamations, the shrill wail of someone trying to reassert control. But she refused to look back. Whatever life she had imagined within those walls had crumbled the moment Adam had thrown her away like something used and unworthy. The men flanking Caleb, bodyguards she now understood with detached clarity, moved ahead, clearing a path through the stunned onlookers who had spilled out of the church in pursuit of the spectacle. Cameras flashed, voices clamored for attention, but none dared to approach too closely. The raw authority emanating from Caleb was as palpable as the summer heat. They reached the helicopter, where a uniformed pilot was waiting beside the open door. The machine itself was a gleaming vision of black and gold, sleek and unmistakably expensive, its polished surfaces gleaming in the sunlight. Caleb turned to Layla with a question in his eyes, not pressuring her but offering. Layla hesitated only a second. Her heart was hammering, her mind spinning with too many questions, too much shock to fully process. But instinct, the same instinct that had made her survive a lifetime of small slights, silent judgments, and quiet dismissals, told her she had to leave now, had to seize the chance being offered to her. She nodded. Caleb helped her into the cabin, his touch careful and respectful, as though she might break. The door swung shut behind them with a soft, solid thud, cutting off the noise of the outside world. Within the cocoon of the helicopter, there was a strange kind of silence, broken only by the muffled whine of the slowing engines. Layla buckled her seatbelt automatically, her hands trembling slightly. The cabin was luxurious without being ostentatious, smooth leather seats, dark wood accents, discreet touches of gold. Caleb sat across from her, his posture composed, his gaze unwavering. The engines roared to life again, and the helicopter lifted off, a smooth, powerful ascent that pressed Layla back against her seat. She watched through the window as the church grew smaller, the colorful stained glass winking in the sunlight, the crowd of guests scattering like ants. She turned away from the window, her throat tight. For several minutes, neither she nor Caleb spoke. The thrum of the rotors filled the space between them, vibrating up through her feet, her spine, her chest. She clutched the fabric of her dress in her fists, trying to anchor herself, to find something solid in a world that had shifted too fast beneath her feet. Finally, Caleb spoke, "I know this is overwhelming," he said, his voice deep and calm. I wish it could have happened differently. But I'm here now. And I promise you, Layla, I'm not going anywhere." She swallowed hard. There were so many things she wanted to say, but the words tangled in her throat. "Why?" she whispered at last, her voice hoarse. "Why today? Why now?" Caleb's expression softened, the lines around his mouth and eyes deepening. "I've been looking for you for years," he said, "ever since I realized that your mother had disappeared with you. I hired investigators. I searched every lead. For a long time, I thought I would never find you. And then, just a few days ago, I received confirmation. A name, a location, a wedding announcement." He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped loosely between his knees. "I knew I had to come. I couldn't miss the chance. Even if it meant interrupting your wedding." Layla stared at him, a painful lump forming in her chest. "You knew I was getting married," she said, her voice shaking. "And you still came?" "I didn't come to stop it," Caleb said quietly. "I came to see you, to finally meet you. But when I arrived, when I saw what was happening, I couldn't stand by and do nothing." Layla pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. All her life, she had imagined her absent father in vague, shadowy terms. Someone who had left, someone who had not wanted her. She had never dared hope for anything more. And yet, here he was, flesh and blood, powerful and real, looking at her with something that could only be described as pride and sorrow. Tears burned behind her eyes. I thought I wasn't good enough," she whispered. Caleb's face tightened, anguish flashing in his dark eyes. "You are more than enough," he said fiercely. "You always have been." The helicopter banked gently, changing course. Layla realized dimly that they were no longer flying over the city. Below them, the landscape stretched out in shades of green and gold, rolling fields, winding rivers, small towns shrinking into the distance. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. "Somewhere private," Caleb said. "Somewhere we can talk. Somewhere safe." The words "safe" resonated deep within her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the steady thrum of the helicopter wash over her, trying to gather her scattered thoughts. She thought of Adam, of the way he had looked at her as if she were something to be ashamed of, something beneath him. She thought of his family, their polished cruelty, their whispered contempt. She thought of the pitying looks of the guests, the sharp, satisfied smiles that some had worn. And she thought of Caleb, standing there in the doorway of the church, defying them all, reaching out to her without hesitation or shame. The contrast was almost too much to bear. When she opened her eyes again, Caleb was still watching her, his expression unreadable but intense. "I know this is a lot," he said again, his voice gentler now, "and I don't expect you to trust me overnight. But I hope you'll give me a chance to be part of your life." Layla stared at him, her heart aching with too many emotions to name. Part of her wanted to retreat, to protect herself, to hide from the enormity of everything that had just happened. But another part, a deeper, stronger part, recognized the truth in his eyes. This was not a man who pitied her. This was not a man who looked at her and saw someone lesser. This was a man who saw her. For perhaps the first time in her life, she was being seen. She nodded, a small, tentative gesture. Caleb's shoulders relaxed slightly, and a smile flickered at the corners of his mouth. A smile full of relief and something close to wonder. The helicopter began its descent toward a sprawling estate nestled among the trees. a place of quiet beauty and understated elegance. Layla sat back in her seat, watching the ground rise to meet them, feeling the first fragile stirrings of something she had thought lost forever. Hope. The helicopter settled smoothly onto a manicured lawn bordered by ancient oaks whose broad canopies cast dappled shadows across the sweeping estate. The blades spun down slowly, their rhythmic chopping fading into the hush of a warm afternoon. As the engine quieted, a new kind of silence enveloped Layla, a silence thick with expectation and unanswered questions. Caleb rose first, offering his hand with quiet dignity. Layla took it, feeling the strength in his grip, the steady presence he exuded so effortlessly. Together, they stepped onto the lush grass, and for a moment, Layla simply stood there, breathing in the crisp, clean air, trying to steady herself against the surreal current carrying her forward. The estate before her was breathtaking. A sprawling stone mansion stood at the heart of the property, its elegant lines softened by time and care. Ivy curled up its walls, and rose gardens burst with color on either side of the wide gravel drive. It was a place that spoke of old wealth, of stability, of generations of lives lived and legacies built. Caleb led her toward the house, his security team falling discreetly behind. As they approached the wide front steps, a woman in a crisp navy suit emerged from the door. She was middle-aged, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat chignon and sharp eyes that softened perceptibly when they landed on Layla. "Miss Simons," she said, offering a warm smile. "Welcome. My name is Eleanor. I've been with Mr. Moore for over 30 years. Layla murmured a greeting, overwhelmed by the formality, by the sheer unreality of it all. Inside, the house was even more stunning. High ceilings with exposed beams, gleaming wood floors softened by thick rugs, walls lined with art that seemed chosen for love rather than status. The space felt alive, curated not just for show but for living, and Layla felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Longing, perhaps, or a sense of belonging just out of reach. Caleb guided her into a sunlit sitting room where wide windows opened onto views of the gardens. He gestured for her to sit, then took the armchair opposite, his movements careful, almost reverent, as though he feared startling her. For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the distant chirp of birds and the faint ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. "You have questions," Caleb said finally, his voice low. Layla twisted her hands in her lap, searching for a starting point among the storm of thoughts swirling inside her. "Why didn't you—" she began, then trailed off, unable to finish. "Why didn't I find you sooner?" Caleb supplied gently. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "The truth is complicated, Layla, and painful." He told her then about how he had met her mother, how a young, ambitious man building his empire had fallen in love with a bright, passionate woman who grounded him in a way nothing else ever had, how their whirlwind romance had led to marriage and to Layla's birth, how the demands of his growing business had pulled him away more and more, until the strain became too much. "Your mother wanted me to slow down," he said, his voice roughening with the memory. "She wanted me to be there for you, for her, and I was foolish. I thought I was building a future for us, but I was really leaving you behind." His eyes darkened with regret. "When she left," he continued, "she didn't just leave the city, she disappeared completely, changed your names, cut all ties. I searched, God knows I searched, but it was like chasing smoke. Every lead went cold." Layla listened, her heart aching, imagining her mother's fear, her loneliness, the weight of the decisions she must have carried for years. "I never stopped looking," Caleb said, his voice fierce now. Never. Even when everyone told me to move on. Even when they said it was hopeless. A lump rose in Layla's throat. She believed him. In her gut, she knew he spoke the truth. And then, Caleb said, a faint smile touching his lips, a wedding announcement. A chance mention in the society column. Your name, your photograph. He paused, studying her face as if memorizing every detail. I saw you, he said simply. And I knew. Tears blurred Layla's vision. She blinked them away angrily, unwilling to appear weak, but Caleb's expression was so open, so filled with aching pride, that she felt her defenses crumbling. You came, she whispered. I would have walked through fire to get to you, he said. They sat for a long moment in a fragile, tentative peace, the first tentative strands of connection weaving between them. But peace was a luxury they could not yet afford. There was still the matter of what had happened at the church. Layla drew a shaky breath, gathering her courage. Adam, his family, she began. Caleb's expression hardened instantly, the warmth in his eyes cooling to something formidable. I know, he said. I saw enough. He rose from his chair and crossed to a cabinet built into the wall. From it, he withdrew a leather-bound folder and placed it on the low table between them. I didn't come just to watch your wedding, he said. I came prepared. Layla frowned, confused, as Caleb opened the folder to reveal a series of documents. Corporate papers, financial records, stock certificates. You see, Caleb said, his voice like iron wrapped in velvet. The Winters family isn't as untouchable as they like to believe. Much of their fortune is tied up in ventures that rely on silent partners, investors who prefer to remain in the shadows. He tapped a page with one blunt finger. I am their largest silent partner, he said. I hold control and interests in several of their key businesses under different corporate entities. They never knew. Layla stared, trying to grasp the implications. And now, Caleb continued, his eyes gleaming with grim satisfaction, I intend to exercise those rights. He sat back, watching her absorb this revelation. What they did to you today, he said, his voice soft but deadly, they will pay for. Not in anger, not in violence, but in the language they understand best. Power, control, consequences. Layla felt the first real spark of something fierce ignite inside her, not vengeance, but a deep, primal sense of justice. For every snide comment she had endured, every judgmental glance, every moment of feeling lesser, this was not about retribution. This was about reclaiming dignity, about refusing to be made small. Caleb closed the folder with a decisive snap. I don't want you to be afraid, he said. You have nothing to fear anymore. You're not alone. Layla nodded slowly, her heart swelling with a complicated mix of emotions. Gratitude, sadness, hope, and beneath it all, a growing determination. She would not let this break her. She would rise from it stronger than before. Outside, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden. Somewhere, deep within the house, a clock chimed the hour, a rich, resonant sound that seemed to echo the quiet rebirth unfolding in the sun-drenched room. Layla looked at Caleb, really looked at him, and for the first time allowed herself to believe. She had a father, and she had a future. It would not be the future she had planned, but perhaps it would be something better, something built not on illusions but on truth and strength. And she would meet it not with fear, but with the fierce, unbreakable spirit that had carried her this far. Together they would face whatever came next. Together they would begin again. The soft chime of the clock faded into silence, leaving Layla and Caleb alone in the sitting room, the weight of the future pressing against them like a gathering storm. The light outside had shifted, casting the room in a honeyed glow that deepened the rich colors of the wood and fabric around them. Yet there was no comfort to be found in the beauty of their surroundings. Not now. Not when decisions were being made that would ripple outward into the lives of so many. Caleb leaned forward once more, his hands steepled beneath his chin, his gaze steady and calculating. There was no anger in his expression, no triumph, only a deep, immutable certainty. He had come not merely to reclaim his daughter, but to right a wrong so profound that it had called forth the full force of his influence, the full breadth of his power. "I want you to understand, Layla," he said, his voice low and grave. "This is not about revenge. Not for me. And it shouldn't be for you. This is about setting things right." Layla nodded, though her heart still beat with the remnants of raw pain. She understood, at least in part. What had been done to her was not a private slight to be forgiven quietly and tucked away. It had been a public act of humiliation, one designed to diminish her, to strip her of dignity. It demanded a response not for the sake of pride alone, but for the sake of all the silent battles she had fought and endured her whole life. Caleb opened the folder once more and slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward her. Layla leaned in, scanning the neat, brutal language of a corporate resolution that would strip the Winters family of their titles, their access, their holdings. It was clinical, efficient, devastating. "They think they own the world," Caleb said softly. "They believe themselves untouchable because they hide their power behind old names and polished smiles. They believe money grants them immunity from decency." Layla looked up at him, her throat tight. "And you?" she asked. Caleb's smile was brief and humorless. "I have more money than they ever dreamed of," he said, "but I never forgot where I came from, or what money cannot buy." He paused, letting the silence settle between them. "You?" he said, his voice softer now. "They looked at you and saw nothing. I look at you and see everything." Tears pricked at the corners of Layla's eyes again, but she blinked them back fiercely. There would be time enough for tears later. Now she needed clarity. "What happens next?" she asked. Caleb's expression sharpened. "Tonight," he said, "we file motions to call an emergency meeting of the Winters Board. By the time the sun rises tomorrow, the family will know they are no longer in control. Their accounts will be frozen, their authority revoked, their influence dismantled." Layla swallowed hard. It was a breathtaking level of power to wield, and she could see the danger of it as clearly as she could see its necessity. "Will it hurt other people?" she asked quietly. "People who work for them?" Caleb's eyes softened, and he gave a slight nod of respect at the question. "I'll ensure the businesses continue to operate," he said. "The employees will be protected. Only the ones who allowed rot to fester will fall." Layla nodded slowly. It was a small comfort, but an important one. A soft knock interrupted them. Eleanor entered, her expression composed but her eyes glittering with excitement. "Everything is in place," she said. "The legal teams are standing by. The notifications will go out at midnight." Caleb inclined his head. "Thank you, Eleanor." The older woman hesitated, then crossed the room to Layla. "I hope you know," she said quietly, "what a remarkable thing you're about to do." Layla managed a small, uncertain smile. She didn't feel remarkable. She felt raw and exposed, like a nerve laid bare. But somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark of strength was beginning to glow. Caleb rose to his feet, and Layla followed. Together they moved through the house to a small study lined with dark bookshelves and heavy drapes. A conference call was already in progress, a dozen faces flickering to life on a large screen at the end of the room. Attorneys, corporate officers, private security consultants, all of them awaiting Caleb's command. He introduced Layla simply as his daughter. There was a moment of stunned silence, but no one dared voice a question. The message was clear. She was not merely a guest, she was the future. Layla sat beside Caleb, listening as he issued directives with quiet authority. Watching him work was like watching a master chess player move his pieces into place, each move calculated 3 steps ahead. Every hesitation was anticipated, every defense countered before it could be raised. By the time the call ended, the first stages of the plan were already in motion. Layla leaned back in her chair, feeling both exhilarated and exhausted. "You make it look easy," she said. Caleb smiled faintly. "It's never easy," he said, "but it's necessary." He rose and crossed to the bar in the corner, pouring 2 glasses of water. He handed one to her. "You don't have to watch if you don't want to," he said. "You've already endured enough." Layla shook her head. She needed to see it through, to understand fully what was happening. At midnight, notifications were dispatched, legal summonses, termination of authority, freezing of discretionary funds. The carefully constructed facade of the Winters empire began to crack. Across town, at the Winters estate, panic must have been spreading like wildfire. Phones would be ringing off the hook, attorneys scrambling, damage control teams mobilizing, but none of it would matter. The foundation was already crumbling. Layla sat in the study, watching the reports come in, the reality of what they were doing settling heavily on her shoulders. She was not naive. She knew there would be backlash. There would be whispers, accusations, perhaps even public scandals. But none of it could outweigh the knowledge that for once, the scales of justice had tilted in favor of the right. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pale gold and soft rose, Caleb turned to her. "It's done," he said. Layla nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She stood slowly and crossed to the window, looking out over the estate. The gardens gleamed with dew. The world looked fresh, new, full of possibility. Behind her, Caleb watched with a father's pride. "You have a choice, Layla," he said. "You can leave it here. Let the old world fall and build your own path. Or you can take your place fully and help shape what comes next." Layla turned back to him, her heart steady now, her gaze clear. "I want to build," she said. Caleb smiled, a true, unguarded smile that lit his face with warmth. "Then we'll build," he said, "together." And for the first time, Layla believed it, not just in him, but in herself. The past had been stripped away, the false dreams, the hollow promises, the people who had seen her as less. All of it burned away in the crucible of betrayal and revelation. What remained was something purer, stronger. A future forged not by the hands of those who had sought to control her, but by her own will, her own heart. And standing beside her, not as a rescuer, but as an ally, was the father she had never dared hope to find. Together, they would shape the new dawn. And this time, no one would stand in their way. The sun rose higher in the sky, gilding the sprawling estate in light that danced across the leaves and painted the stone walls with a soft golden glow. Inside the study where Layla had spent the night watching the downfall of the Winters family unfold, the atmosphere had shifted. The urgency, the tense focus, had given way to something quieter, more reflective. Yet, beneath that calm, a new resolve had taken root. deep and unshakable. Layla stood by the tall window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. She looked at herself with a strange sense of detachment, as if meeting her own gaze for the first time. The woman, staring back at her, no longer resembled the girl who had walked nervously down the aisle just yesterday. Her heart, full of dreams she had not realized were built on a crumbling foundation. No, this Layla was different. She was no longer a supplicant at the gates of other people's approval. She was no longer willing to measure her worth against standards that had never been made for her. She had survived betrayal, public humiliation, and the cruel dismissal of those who deemed her unworthy, and she was still standing, stronger. Caleb entered the room carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee, his movements easy, unhurried. He handed one to Layla without a word and joined her at the window, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. For a time, they simply drank their coffee in silence, watching the world awaken beyond the gardens. Birds flitted from tree to tree, and the breeze carried the scent of roses and fresh earth. It was a peaceful moment, but neither of them mistook it for an end. It was, instead, a beginning. Layla set her cup down on the windowsill and turned to face her father. "What happens now?" she asked. Caleb smiled slightly, a shadow of amusement in his eyes. "Now," he said, "we decide what kind of future you want to build." The words sent a thrill through Layla, not fear, not pressure, but possibility. She realized then that Caleb had never tried to force her into anything. He had laid the groundwork, removed the obstacles, and now he was offering her the agency she had always deserved. It was her choice, her life. They spent the morning walking the grounds, Caleb showing her the estate's history. There were stables once filled with prize horses, now quiet but well kept. A greenhouse bursting with exotic plants her father had collected from his travels. A private library that made her heart ache with its sheer wealth of knowledge, thousands of volumes stretching across polished wooden shelves. Everywhere they went, Caleb told stories, not just of business triumphs or society galas, but of failures, regrets, lessons learned the hard way. He spoke of the loneliness that had come with building an empire, the relationships strained or lost, the moments of doubt when success had seemed a hollow prize. Through his candor, Layla saw the man behind the legend, and she found herself responding not just with awe, but with understanding. By midday, they sat together under the shade of a massive oak tree, a picnic spread between them prepared by Eleanor and the kitchen staff. Layla picked at her sandwich, her appetite dulled by the swirl of emotions within her. "I feel like I should be angrier," she said suddenly, "at Adam, at his family, at everything." Caleb regarded her steadily. "Anger has its place," he said. "It can fuel change, but it can also consume you if you let it." Layla nodded thoughtfully. She had felt the fire of anger the day before, hot and blinding, but now it had cooled into something harder, more enduring, a determination to define herself by more than the wounds others had inflicted. "I don't want to live in reaction to them," she said. "I don't want my life to be a rebuttal to their cruelty." Caleb smiled, a genuine expression of pride. "Then you won't," he said simply. In the days that followed, Layla began to find her footing. She met with Caleb's advisors, learning about the structures of the companies in which she now held influence. She sat in on meetings, at first silent, absorbing everything, then slowly beginning to ask questions, to offer insights. Her natural intelligence and empathy, long dismissed as naive or impractical by others, proved invaluable. She saw what others missed, the human impact behind every number, every policy, every decision. Caleb watched her with a kind of quiet wonder, recognizing in her the qualities he had always hoped his legacy would embody, but had never quite achieved on his own. Word of the Winters' downfall spread quickly through the business world, though the true extent of Layla's involvement remained known only to a select few. In public, Caleb framed the upheaval as a routine restructuring, allowing the Winters family to save face even as they lost everything that had once given them power. Layla appreciated the subtlety. It was not about gloating. It was about moving forward with dignity. Yet not everyone was content to let the past lie. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the estate in fiery hues, Eleanor approached them with a message. "There's been a request for a meeting," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "from Adam Winters." Layla felt a jolt of something, anger, sorrow, a flicker of the old hurt she had thought buried. She met Caleb's gaze. "What should I do?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "Whatever you choose," he said. "You owe him nothing." Layla considered for a long moment. Part of her wanted to refuse, to deny Adam even the dignity of a response. But another part, deeper, stronger, recognized an opportunity. Not for revenge, but for closure. "I'll see him," she said. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon, in a neutral location on the estate grounds, a small pavilion overlooking the reflecting pool. Caleb did not accompany her, though she knew he would be close by if she needed him. She arrived early, dressed simply but elegantly in a soft blue dress that complemented her skin and brought out the rich darkness of her eyes. She felt no need for armor, no need to project anything but herself. Adam arrived late, his steps hesitant, his face drawn. He looked different, thinner, worn, the easy arrogance stripped away. He carried a bouquet of flowers, cheap ones hastily bought, and held them out like a shield. Layla did not reach for them. "Thank you for meeting me," Adam said, his voice rough. Layla inclined her head, but said nothing, waiting. "I made a mistake," he continued, rushing the words. "I was stupid. I let my family's expectations, their prejudices, dictate my actions. I was scared." Layla studied him, noting the way he fidgeted, the way his eyes darted nervously. "I see," she said quietly. "I still love you," Adam said desperately. "I realize now what I lost. Give me a chance to make it right." For a moment, she felt the ghost of the girl who had once loved him, who had dreamed of a life together. But that girl was gone, replaced by a woman who understood her own worth. "You didn't lose me because you were scared," Layla said, her voice calm. "You lost me because you saw my worth only when you thought it could elevate you, not when it was just mine." Adam flinched as if struck. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I hope you find your way," Layla said gently but firmly, "but you won't find it with me." She turned and walked away, her steps steady, her heart lighter with each one. She did not look back. Later that evening, as the stars blanketed the sky and the estate lights glowed warmly in the dark, Layla sat with Caleb on the terrace sipping tea. "You did well," he said simply. Layla smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her. "I feel free," she said. Caleb nodded. "You are," he said, "and you always were. You just had to see it for yourself." The night stretched before them, filled with endless possibilities. And for the first time, Layla felt ready to embrace them all, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as herself, whole, unbreakable, free. Morning came softly to the estate, with golden light spilling across the lawns and creeping gently through the open balcony doors of Layla's room. She stirred beneath the cool linen sheets, the familiar weight of sleep slowly lifting as consciousness returned. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she awoke without the heavy sensation of dread or sadness pressing against her ribs. Instead, there was a lightness, tentative but real, like the first fragile bloom of spring after a long, bitter winter. She rose and crossed the room, pausing at the balcony to breathe in the fresh, dew-laden air. The gardens stretched out before her, vibrant and alive, a tapestry of color and life. Beyond them, the world waited, a world no longer filled with insurmountable barriers and silent judgments, but with open roads and uncharted possibilities. Behind her, on a side table, lay a stack of documents Eleanor had delivered late the night before. Legal papers, trust declarations, business proposals. Caleb had not pressured her to review them immediately. He had simply said, in that calm, unwavering voice of his, that they were hers to consider when she was ready. Today, she thought, she would be ready. After a quick shower, she dressed in simple clothes, a soft white blouse and tailored pants, and made her way downstairs, her steps light, her heart steady. She found Caleb already in the sunroom, seated with a tablet in one hand and a coffee in the other. When he saw her, he set them aside and rose, a warm smile touching his face. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied, crossing the room to join him. They ate breakfast together, a quiet, companionable meal filled with easy conversation. Caleb asked about her interests, her dreams, her thoughts for the future, not with the pointed precision of a businessman seeking an heir, but with the genuine curiosity of a father eager to know his daughter. Afterward, they walked the grounds once more, this time with no agenda other than to enjoy the day. The late spring air was thick with the scent of wisteria and honeysuckle, and the gravel paths crunched pleasantly beneath their shoes. Caleb showed her the orchard where he had once dreamed of retiring, the small pond where he had taught himself patience by learning to fish, the quiet grove where he went to think when the burdens of the world became too heavy. Layla listened, asked questions, shared stories of her own. Small things, memories of childhood, of teaching, of dreams once nurtured in secret. As the morning wore on, a fragile but real bond began to weave itself between them, stronger than blood alone, built on shared moments and the tentative offering of trust. When they returned to the house, Eleanor was waiting with news. "The Winters family has requested a formal meeting," she said. "They wish to discuss terms." Caleb arched an eyebrow but made no comment. He looked at Layla instead, letting her see that the decision was hers. She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "I have nothing to say to them," she said. Caleb nodded approvingly. "Very well," Eleanor said, and with a few efficient taps on her tablet, the matter was closed. Layla felt a sense of finality settle over her. A chapter ended, a door closed with deliberate finality. She had no desire to linger in the ruins of what might have been. The past had no claim on her now. Instead, she turned her attention to the future. That afternoon, Caleb invited her into his private office, a room lined with dark wood and heavy books, the air faintly scented with leather and old paper. On the massive desk before him lay several folders, each carefully labeled. "This is what I built," he said quietly, gesturing to them. "The companies, the foundations, the projects. It's yours if you want it. All of it." Layla stared at the folders, the weight of what he was offering settling over her like a tangible thing. "I don't know the first thing about running a business," she said honestly. "You'll learn," Caleb said, "and you won't do it alone. You'll have advisors, mentors, people you trust." He paused, then added, "But you don't have to decide today, or tomorrow, or ever, if you choose another path. My only wish is that you live the life you want, not the life anyone else expects." The sincerity in his voice moved her more than any grand gesture could have. He wasn't trying to mold her into an heir. He was offering her freedom. She stepped forward and placed a hand lightly on one of the folders. "I want to learn," she said. Caleb smiled, a slow, proud smile that reached his eyes. "Then we'll begin together," he said. Over the following weeks, Layla immersed herself in learning. She met with Caleb's key executives, shadowed meetings, asked questions that revealed her keen instincts and sharp intelligence. She spent hours in the library studying finance, economics, philanthropy. It was daunting, often overwhelming, but she approached it with the quiet determination that had seen her through every other challenge in her life. Slowly, she began to see where she could make a difference, not by mimicking Caleb's methods, but by forging her own style. She had a natural gift for seeing the human side of business, for balancing profit with purpose. Under her influence, new initiatives began to take shape. Programs supporting education, healthcare, community development. Caleb watched with a pride he could barely contain, stepping back just enough to let her shine. Not everyone welcomed her ascendancy. There were murmurs, resistance from those who had grown comfortable in the old ways, who saw in her youth and compassion a threat to their entrenched power. But Layla met their skepticism with quiet resolve, winning allies not through force or fear, but through vision and authenticity. She was not Caleb Moore. She was Layla Simons, and she would build a future in her own image. One evening, after a particularly grueling series of meetings, Layla returned to the estate to find Caleb waiting on the terrace, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses set between them. He rose as she approached, his face alight with pride. "You were extraordinary today," he said simply. Layla laughed softly, sinking into the chair beside him. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Good," Caleb said, pouring the wine. "It means you care." They drank to new beginnings, to second chances, to the improbable, miraculous path that had brought them together. As the stars blinked to life above them, Layla realized that she was no longer defined by the betrayals she had suffered, the judgments she had endured. She was defined by the choices she made, the strength she claimed, the life she created. She was not the girl Adam had left at the altar. She was not the orphaned daughter of whispered regrets. She was her own woman, strong, unbreakable, free. And as the night stretched out before her, filled with the endless possibilities of a life reclaimed and remade, she smiled, feeling, at last, the full weight of her own power. The future was hers, and she would meet it head-on, not with fear, but with the quiet, fierce joy of a soul finally, fully set free. The new beginning had already begun, and this time it belonged entirely to her. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more. Make sure to watch the next and other videos for more incredible journeys. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who would appreciate it too. Thank you for watching.